having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. In order to help our podcast series, please press subscribe and share it with family and friends. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Coulthard, a senior lecturer in marine social science at Newcastle University, who joins us to chat about the effects of the suggested ban on bottom trawling proposed by Sir David Attenborough in his latest film, Ocean. Hi, Sarah, and welcome to Seafood Matters.
Hi, Tim. Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. If we start with the obvious, on the film, what was your gut reaction when you saw the Attenborough piece calling for a full ban on bottom trawling?
Yeah, so I went to see the film about a week ago. I took my 11-year-old daughter and 9-year-old niece. And we went together to see it. And I think, first of all, to say that the documentary as a whole is just a stunning piece of cinematography. I was absolutely struck and in awe by the incredibly beautiful portrayal of ocean life. And I also have to say, I've never seen the cinema in my hometown so full. It was absolutely packed, which is quite an experience. But my gut reaction on the trawling piece, I think, first and foremost, I felt real empathy for fishermen. Especially trawler fishermen, but indeed all fishermen, as the narrative of the film was rather indiscriminate at times, frequently conflating trawling damage and fishing damage more generally. David Attenborough is a national treasure. We've all grown up with him in the background, and I think it could have hurt fishermen to see their livelihoods being portrayed in this way. Fishermen are an important part of ocean life, and it was a shame, I think, to have isolated them from the story, to only appear as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So that was my first gut reaction, but I must say my other gut reaction was the amount of waste that trawling produces, and I think this was very hard to watch. My daughter actually walked out at this point because she found it really upsetting. And I think everyone must agree that it is a serious problem to be tackled. I had a conversation recently with a former trawler fisherman who described how he used to run around the deck trying to save bycatch, throwing critically endangered flapper skates and other species overboard before they died. And this description from him has really stuck with me. We are a nation of people, I think, who generally do not like to see waste. And of course, waste is a problem throughout all food production, not just trawling, and that's important to recognise. But that doesn't mean that we just assume it away as being too hard a challenge to address. I think you might remember Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall's TV programmes, War on Waste, resulted in us now seeing wonky carrots and imperfect apples available to buy in some supermarkets, which is progress. So I think reducing waste across all food production systems is hugely important, and more needs to be done with that regard. Acknowledging, of course, that there is a lot of work being done to reduce bycatch in trawling and to reduce the damage to the seabed. It was a shame that the film couldn't showcase some of those efforts as well, which are often done in partnership with fishermen. And for example, in Northumberland, where I live, our local Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, our IFCA, is working really closely with the skipper of a small-scale prawn trawling vessel to trial modifications to his fishing gear so that it reduces contact with the seabed. Similarly, the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation is leading initiatives in Scotland to reduce entanglement of whales in creel rope. They train fishermen how to untangle the whales safely and are adopting heavier ropes to reduce its occurrence. And I think these are really positive stories showing the importance of reducing the environmental impacts of fishing in partnership with fishermen. I was also a little bit surprised about the singling out of trawling. Several times in the film where the food security was being highlighted, and it was really important that this was covered in the film. We saw footage of fishermen in West Africa, I think, pulling in a beach seine. And this is a really important story to tell, where small-scale fishermen are hugely undermined and threatened by industrial nomadic trawlers from other countries who have often overfished their own waters. However, in many parts of Africa, and I've done research on this in Kenya, the beach seine as a gear is completely banned because it lands small juvenile fish and has been argued, with a large backing from environmental NGOs, to be unsustainable and in places environmentally damaging. And some of my research over the years has shown that the seining ban has serious implications for food security in coastal regions in parts of Eastern Africa. And this detail, this nuance, was lacking in the film, because I think it is the case that blanket bans of types of gears, and I've really seen this in Kenya firsthand, can really cause harm to coastal communities, and there needs to be greater reflection about that. Rather long answer, if that's okay.
No, that's good. That's good. I just feel at times minimum sizes increased to conserve stocks. I think it's just almost like it's market driven. It's market led, and that just increases bycatch, increases a problem. You know, I've filleted quite a bit of fish in recent times when I'm visiting the pier when boats are landing, and the skipper will just say, "Look, help yourself," and then I'll be helping myself, and they'll say, "No, don't take that. Here, take some better fish. This is fine for me." Now, just say, for example, a haddock. I take a haddock, and I'll look at it, fillet it when I'm home, and this is for my own interest, and I'll look at the size. Now, we had a fish shop, part of our business, going back as far as the 70s and 80s, and the size and the quality for fishmongers, you could almost say, was prime quality, prime size, and that would be the price on the market. And the fish I've got with me, just say, for example, in old money, it would be around about a 4-ounce fillet. Now, the 4-ounce fillet would give a housewife maybe 4 fillets to the pound. So she'd be buying her pound of fish for her family. She'd have 4 fillets. That fish I've been getting is anything between 4.5 to 5.5 ounces. So in our days, that would have gone into the fishmonger. And do you know where I got it from? The bycatch bait for shellfish, crab and lobster. Because there's no market for it any longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's really interesting talking to the public about their perceptions of the film. I was just in the Whitby Fish and Chips Festival last weekend, and there was quite a lot of comment from people who had seen the film and those who hadn't about concerns about waste and just what to do about it. And I think trying to work with markets to make them more effective so that the waste is reduced would be a good thing. Obviously, that's a very complex thing to do. We haven't managed to do it yet. But yeah, certainly more could be done around that. But I think one of the biggest messages from the movie was to try and resolve that in some way. And kind of gasps around the cinema when that part came on, I think, were telling to that as well.
I just felt with that, it was marketable fish, perfectly good for us. Of course, it's the market. The reason for it all is because the market wants bigger fish now. So I hear anyway, I can't accept it because, as I've said to a few traders, I see. So you reckon that the housewife would far rather pay £25 a kilo than 10, not pay so much for it And then we have obesity problems. So where does it all end?
Yeah, I don't have the answers to that one.
No, I don't. Nobody does. Nobody does. It's out of hand, I think, and it needs to get out. We need to get a grip. Do high-profile documentaries have a duty to show balanced science, or is good photography and clever storytelling enough to shape public opinion?
This is a really interesting question. I think clever storytelling will always shape public opinion, probably more than anything else. And it has always been that way, hasn't it? And also, bad news always sells more than good. But I do think that the book really stops with the scientists. We have not got our act together. We offer highly polarized advice. It's all evidence based, but it addresses different questions, uses different methods and data, and produces very different recommendations. So it does boil down, I think, to the communication of evidence and the persuasiveness of arguments that are made. And at times, the balance is lost. So I think we, as scientists, need to get much better at doing interdisciplinary research and really integrating different evidence from across environmental, economic, and social sciences. And research funders have been asking us to do this for decades, and we're still not really delivering it. And I think the film exposes that lack of joined up thinking from scientists. It was very much from an environmental science perspective.
Yeah, but I often wonder if one of the messages that has been lost with this as well, and I got this from a fisheries scientist in an earlier podcast, and he worked with what was Marine Scotland, which is now the Marine Directorate, and he did a lot of surveys on prawns. And the results they have, which I thought was interesting. So the authorities have that information on file, and he reckons that from a conservation point of view, on nephrops, prawns as we call them, trawling is better for the stock than creels, because he says with the nature of the way they live, the prawn, it's all, as he described, it's almost like a harem. A male will service maybe up to 15 to 20 females. Now, the results they found, when they're trawling, there'll be 60 to 80% of the catch will be males, and a far, far smaller percentage is females. But when it's taken from creels, the percentage of female is far greater. The reason for the trawl is males are out their burrows and foraging and feeding all most of the day, and the females only come out once a day to feed. And of course they go into the creel and that's them caught. So he says they have that information there, and that was done a lot. So on a conservation point of view, trawling for nephrops is better than static gear.
Well, that's if you're just taking it from the perspective of the stock. I mean, I can't comment on that specific study, and I'm certainly not a prawn specialist or a social scientist. So we only really talk about sort of society of fishing. But I think the point really to think about there, I think that you've clarified there, is that there's also divisions within environmental science and within fishery science about the perspectives of those who are understanding how stocks work, so within a single species, and those who are advocating for a broader ecosystems approach to fisheries management that looks at the interdependencies of the prawn with everything else that's in the sea and tries to understand it as part of the broader ecosystem. So that, I suppose, that's one element to bring to that. But yeah, I mean, it's all just very contested, and I think no wonder the public and everybody else is confused about what to do. But I think that's down to scientists need to get much better at talking with each other across these different fields of research to try and come out with some kind of consensus around what's going on and how things work.
To be blunt, is this film eco-propaganda?
I don't think it is. No, I think it was. I think it could have been better informed with more divergent views about what is working. So yeah, I think eco propaganda is quite a strong term. I wouldn't necessarily use that. It has to be,
And
some credit has to be given to the documentary makers. They're trying to raise awareness of the value of our ocean and the complexity of it, I think, which is no bad thing. But I think, the particular focus on trawling, I think, was a bit of a missed opportunity to offer a more balanced view about some of the things that are working in fisheries management more generally, not rather than just focusing on that.
is this a fair fight or environmental bullying?
No, I don't. I don't think. Well, there are several injustices in this, which I probably lay out to you if you had to ask me about whether I was for or against a ban on bottom trawling. I think that the fair fight aspect. I think there are powerful voices on both sides, both the fishing industry and environmental NGOs. And sadly, people fall through the cracks of that in the middle, who are being impacted, by that division, which is a shame. So I would really, I'm always trying to urge very competing opinions and different opposing sides to try and come together and find some level of common ground. I think it's really important.
Are you for or against a ban on all trawling in all MPAs in the UK, or outline your reasoning?
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Drivers who switch and save with Progressive could save hundreds. With that kind of money, you could go big time on a fancy water bottle with ultra titanium alloy metal. You're not sure why you need all that. I mean, it just holds water. But you're getting it anyway. Because if you're hiking near an active volcano and you accidentally drop the bottle into molten lava, your water will still be icy cold. Switch to Progressive and you could save big time. For water bottles. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states. Potential savings will vary.
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this. So hear me out. I think to start with, I think there is a stronger case for stopping industrial scale trawling in MPAs, although that comes with the caveat that how you're defining industrial scale is indeed a challenge. And I think to stop trawling where there is evidence that it's causing damage to protected features in MPAs, such as seagrass beds, etc. These are really important habitats that do need protecting for the societal benefits that they deliver. And I don't imagine there's much controversy about that. However, the current campaign from several NGOs is about an indiscriminate ban on all trawling in all MPAs. And this is a different thing, and this is something that I do not support. And there are three main reasons why. I'll go through those if I may. So because as far as I've seen, the first reason, as far as I've seen, and I may be wrong, sometimes I am, the campaigns have paid no consideration at all to the impacts on people's lives. So how would such a ban affect regional economies in coastal areas that are already struggling with multiple forms of deprivation and disadvantage relative to inland areas? And I find that quite a shame, really. Of all the resource that must be thrown at these campaigns, it is not a big job to conduct a straightforward assessment of how many boats and how many families would be affected by a ban on trawling, so that we can transparently weigh up the proposed ecological gains against economic and social costs. So I think promoting the ban without due recognition of the impact on people's lives is really, is unethical, and in my view is against the principles that are laid out in the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is an international vision for global biodiversity goals to which we are signed up to as a country. And it's explicit in its wording that protecting and restoring natural ecosystems should be done in a way that takes into account those people most dependent on biodiversity. encouraging sustainable use by Indigenous and local communities. And taking into account surely means conducting social impact assessments of some form and working in partnership with fishermen to try and improve biodiversity goals together. So I really hope to see some change regarding this. We've got very rich data on the UK fishing fleet in this country. Seafish conducts its annual fleet survey, which is publicly available. So establishing the societal impact of the ban should be a priority, so that informed choices can be made. So that's reason one. I would never be able to support something where I don't feel that I can see the full implications of doing so. The second reason is related to this, but it also comes across in some of the narrative of the Ocean movie, that there's a continuing sense that MPAs cover such small areas that banning trawling within them is a tiny ask. And this is just not the case in the UK, at least. Overall, we have 38% of UK waters covered by an MPA designation of one form or another, and this rises to 47% inshore, so within the 6 nautical miles of the coastline. This is according to JNCC figures. And this is where many of our small-scale fisheries, which make up 70% of our fleet, are heavily dependent on fishing grounds. Shallow inshore seas, as it was pointed out in the Ocean movie, often have a much higher concentration of biodiversity and protected features and subsequently higher MPA coverage. So the burden of a complete ban on trawling is very likely to be shouldered by the small-scale fishing sector, who are arguably less able to absorb the costs of lost ground and are often, albeit not always, doing less damage relative to industrial scale trawling. So in England, the average is 51% of our inshore waters are now designated as an MPA. And some regions, this is as high as 90%, for example, on our eastern coastline. In Northumberland, it's 70%. So we really need some transparency about the extent to which a ban on trawling in all MPAs disadvantages small-scale fishers, many of whom are reliant on trawling inshore because their boats are small and it's unsafe to venture offshore. So it's very contradictory for an NGO to say it supports small-scale fisheries, which many of the environmental NGOs claim, but then be silent on whether this extends to small-scale trawlers. So the third reason, and this is really the biggest one and why I wanted to do this podcast, we often hear that MPAs are just paper parks, designated on paper only. I think David Attenborough made reference to this as well. But this is absolutely not the case in England's inshore waters, because we have regional fisheries management bodies called IFCAs, who have spent the last 10 years carefully implementing DEFRA's revised approach to MPA management. Offshore is a different matter, and the MMO are implementing new management there, which I know less about. But I just spent the last 2 years writing a report for the Association of IFCAs, where I was interviewing over 70 staff and committee members from across all 10 of England's IFCAs. And one of their major achievements is inshore MPA management. So IFCAs have already carefully assessed every fishing activity that takes place in an MPA, its impacts on protected features, which are the reasons why the MPAs were originally established. And then using that evidence, produced by themselves and other statutory bodies like Natural England, accompanied by extensive stakeholder engagement with coastal communities in their regions, they've got a really good understanding of the local social and economic context of the MPAs and the management that's required. And they've not only assessed what those fishing impacts are, but then they've implemented, using their local bylaw making powers, effective management measures that either remove or mitigate the impact. And this is really delivering on a case-by-case basis for each MPA, a balance between effective conservation and protection of features with viable fishing livelihoods. IFCAs evolved, they were set up by the Marine and Coastal Access Act, MACA, in 2009 to do this, and they've been delivering effective MPA management ever since. And this is done through the IFCA process in partnerships with fishermen who sit on the decision-making committees alongside a range of other coastal stakeholders, all representing different coastal interests in their regions, which includes environmental groups. And they, as a committee, they navigate the hard choices and trade-offs through debate in their committees, which sometimes does result in frayed relationships with fishermen who over the years have had to concede a lot to make room for effective conservation. So in England, inshore, trawling where it is permitted in an MPA is carefully monitored, it's carefully managed, and the IFCA enforces the management it produces, and it coexists alongside effective marine conservation. And there are many examples of this, which I won't go into great detail with, but a good example is Poole Harbour on the Dorset coast. This is a local, small-scale dredge fishery for clams and cockles. It's an MSC certified fishery for its sustainability, and it delivers huge benefits to the local region. And I think if you've ever been to some of the seafood restaurants in Poole, you'll know what I mean. The protected features of the harbour, which is one of the most heavily designated MPAs in Europe, I think, are carefully monitored for impact. The management in place has been tailored, combining a whole suite of different tools. They've got no take zones, you've got licenses to limit fishing pressure, you cannot fish at certain times of the day to avoid bird disturbance during certain seasons, which is what many of our MPAs are designated to protect, is bird wildlife. And it's almost like a work of art, enabling coexistence of trawling and effective MPA protection. So, in my view, a call for a complete ban of trawling in MPAs is an abandonment of the management that we now have in place inshore in England, at least. And I would stress here that the IFCA delivery of DEFRA's revised approach is only relevant for England. I cannot speak for other countries in the UK, but I know that there is a real concern about the lack of MPA management where there remains high levels of trawling inshore, and I think this is warranted. But it would have been a great thing to see David Attenborough discussing some of the innovations of IFCA MPA management to really celebrate the achievements made in the pursuit of coexistence of fisheries in the natural world. So, I feel it's a bit of a lost opportunity. It would have been good to have heard some of that, a real positive story there.
Yes, especially to have the environment at sea or ocean and not have fishermen in it when they're such a major part of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're right. To start talking about fisheries management or the ocean, without fishermen in it is just a non-starter. They need to be part of the solution. They have rights to be part of that story. They're an important part of that story.
Yeah, it asks the question, are they trying to ban something they don't understand?
I think this is the lack of acknowledgement of the progress that has been made in MPA management and good process that's in place. And I think this is not a difficult thing to resolve. And it's a case of just going back to the same old arguments without acknowledging the progress. Yeah, that's what I think.
What do you feel about banning bottom trawling? It doesn't stop demand, it just ships it off to someone else with lower standards. And where's the logic in that? If it's a country that hasn't got the standards that we have, that we're going to be importing it from.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. How there's huge variation in the capacity to enforce, to implement the management and then enforce it. That's obviously very unequal capacities of different countries around the world to do that. So in a way, that's a really good point, because it just puts the onus on.
Drivers who switch and save with Progressive could save hundreds. With that kind of money, you could go big time on a fancy water bottle with ultra titanium alloy metal. You're not sure why you need all that. I mean, it just holds water, but you're getting it anyway. Because if you're hiking near an active volcano and you accidentally drop the bottle into molten lava, your water will still be icy cold. Switch to Progressive and you could save big time. For water bottles. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states. Potential savings will vary.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
countries like the UK that are already delivering some really high quality management to really recognise that and to promote it and to share knowledge about how it can be done.
What's your views on alternatives to bans in what? MPA, seasonal closures, gear innovations?
I would just say management, and especially regional co-management of MPAs, which involve communities, is the way forward. And I think that's exactly what the IFCAs are delivering in England. Adoption of that model and real investment into producing the evidence that underpins decision-making process. Decision-making processes that include rather than exclude all those who are involved and impacted by the decisions is really the only fair and effective way forward. And it's where you'll get the real buy-in from coastal communities. Not everybody will agree with the outcome in terms of the management decisions, but at least they can be part of and respect the legitimacy of process by which decisions are made. And the best thing about this is that the delivery of IFCA MPA management in England shows that it can be done and it shows how to do it. And it's not perfect, but what is? And I think it's as good as we probably ever get, to be honest. And so I think that's the alternative to the ban is investing in proper management. And I think the value of doing that at regional level is enormous because that is where the detailed understanding of not just the environment, but also the social and the economic contexts within the region where the MPA is located, that is all harboured at regional level, really.
I speak to all kinds, trawlers, scallop dredgers, and study gear, creel fishermen, as we call them here. And they're perfectly comfortable with, saying seasonal closures. They would maybe, one of them would maybe fish an area for a certain period, and then they would move away. And another form of fishing would come in. And they do that successfully, Linda, just talking to each other. So it is working to a degree, maybe not legislation, but it does work. And fishermen are perfectly happy to speak about that.
Yeah, I've had similar conversations with creel fishermen in Northumberland, and they often sort of lament the natural seasonal closures that used to occur over the winter months when they would give the lobster grounds a rest and they'd turn to netting for salmon. But now that is lost. They can't. They're restricted from netting, hugely restricted from fishing for salmon at all now, and that diversification has been eroded over the years. So now they are fishing all year round, fishing hard for lobster. They have to make ends meet as well, and that, so that there's been a kind of the traditional seasonality of fishing is something that we have lost, which is a great shame. And so anything to try and support that to come back again, I think I imagine it's very welcomed by fishermen. Certainly, fishermen in Northumberland I speak to would advocate for that as well. But as well as limiting the amount of intense fishing that goes on. I did a study recently with potters in Northumberland, and all of them were very grateful for the inshore pot limitation that we have in Northumberland, which is 800 pots per boat. Offshore beyond 6 nautical miles, that doesn't exist, and they are by and large. The people I interviewed were quite concerned about the overfishing that happens beyond the 6, but were quite happy that within the 6, at least, they've got that limitation in there. And I know that other IFCAs are trying to implement that as we speak in other parts of the country. But there's huge value in going to fishermen with the problem, saying, how would you manage this in its entirety, rather than doing what we currently seem to do as scientists and as the government, which is going to fishermen with some pre-designed, pre-cooked solutions and asking them if they agree or not. That stunts creativity and the wealth of knowledge that fishermen have about how to manage their own livelihoods.
Is there a risk of celebrity-driven environmentalism? And what qualifications does Attenborough have regarding bottom trawling?
Yeah, again, I think it's down to the scientists to ensure that the research teams behind documentaries is fully informed. I think celebrities contribute a great deal. The work of David Attenborough has been incredibly important over the years to inspire so many of us to take an interest in the natural world. I think those stories just need to be expanded a little to include the people who depend on those natural resources for their livelihoods, so that they become part of the story rather than on the margins of it. And I think, yeah, that I don't know how you do that, but it would have been nice. This could have been an opportunity to do more of that, I think, in this movie. And some of it is there. You do at least see fishermen, and there is the recognition of food security, and there's some interviews with fishermen, which is an important part of the movie. So it's not, it was balanced in some respects.
It's interesting, people different views. Some people a fisherman would say, well, after this lot, he's certainly not a national treasure in the eyes of fishing crews. He's a campaigner. This film lands like a torpedo under the waterline of in the industry already under siege. And is he telling half truths? And when you've got the voice of God, as some people's on a global platform, half the story can do real damage.
Yeah, but I think that again, the book plays with the scientists. As a social scientist, it's my fault that movie went ahead without me making these points. How do we communicate our science more effectively? I don't know. So that's something I've been reflecting on, because I do think it's the responsibility as with the scientists to, as I said before, get their act together and work more closely and have debates and ask the hard questions. But at least having the debate is what matters, and I don't think we do that enough. We tend to have gone down a route of busily writing papers and not having enough platforms for this meaningful discussion. It's a real shame. The state of academia these days is often in the news. could be doing better on all fronts, but this in particular.
Just transition. What do you understand about the term just transition, and what relevance do you think it has in the context of a trawl ban and MPAs?
Yeah, so this is I think a very useful term, which I would like to hear more of in the context of this. And so we often hear it, but I think often when we hear just transition, people talk about the transition, which is about the change. And I think we do need to change to reduce the environmental impact of food production across all sectors, not just in fisheries. But there has been too much focus on the transitioning part of this and less focus on the justice element. I think for transition to be just, it needs to include those who stand to be most affected by the change, which in this case would be the fishermen. Their voices need to be heard in this as part of procedural justice, and at the moment they're just not being heard, I think, at all. Which is a missed opportunity as well as a clear injustice. I recall speaking with a former scallop dredger who had moved into potting. It's up on the Northumberland coast, where the IFCA here has removed all scallop dredging within its district years ago. But the fisherman who is now potting, he reflected that actually he didn't like to dredge the beds, and he could see that was causing damage, and he had moved into potting and actually preferred it as a lower impact form of fishing. That's just one fisherman. This really needs to be discussed with fishermen, and to understand the wider context of people's lives, the needs that the things that they need to make a living, what they're up against, and what is possible and what is not possible for them. Some of the work I've done recently has really highlighted the decline in our fishing industry, which we've got over 25% of decline in many parts of the UK in just the last 14 years. It's a struggling industry in many ways, losing a lot of boats from harbours. So we need to take that into account as an important context when we're talking about a just transition. So how do we make sure that the just transition doesn't just become a complete elimination of the entire fishing industry, which, as a country, we value greatly, beyond economic contributions and food contributions? People also have a very strong affinity with the cultural and heritage value of fisheries.
What do you think would be the biggest consequence of implementing and not implementing a ban on trawling and MPAs?
So I read yesterday a very good article in The Spectator, and it was written, obviously, in the aftermath of the disappointment of the EU trade negotiations this week. It was written by Gus Carter in The Spectator, and it was published with the title "Why Fishing Matters."
Drivers who switch and save with Progressive could save hundreds. With that kind of money, you could go big time on a fancy water bottle with ultra titanium alloy metal. You're not sure why you need all that. I mean, it just holds water. But you're getting it anyway. Because if you're hiking near an active volcano and you accidentally drop the bottle into molten lava, your water will still be icy cold. Switch to Progressive and you could save big time. For water bottles. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states. Potential savings will vary.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
And the last line of the article will resonate with many who are working in and for commercial fisheries. And it reads simply this. It says, keeping our fishermen alive is more than an economic calculation. It's a cultural duty. And that really resonated with me. And so I think that implementing a ban across all MPAs would be a failure of our fisheries. And I think it could risk undermining our food security, which has often been said is our national security. What we need to consider here is the true extent of MPA coverage, the impacts on landed fish, as well as livelihoods lost. And remember that fisheries is vulnerable to climate change, but in different ways to the food that we produce on land. A long dry summer or prolonged periods of flooding does not affect fishermen in the same way as it will affect farmers. And this needs to be recognised, I think. So these would be the two consequences of implementing it in its current format. But I think we still need to keep these conversations going. I think it's down to the environmental NGOs to show a bit of flexibility and acknowledge this wider context of a fishing fleet that's in decline, acknowledge some of the impacts, particularly on small-scale fisheries, that many of the environmental NGOs claim to be supporting, and to show us a broader range of evidence so that we can perhaps try and move forward in a more collaborative way.
You brushed on the human cost of a ban. What would a ban on trawling mean for coastal communities and livelihoods?
Well, currently we don't know, which is precisely the problem. We need to establish what that is, and then make an informed decisions about what are the costs and disadvantages of this. And I think what I would stress here is looking at the inequalities of it. So often I find, and this is not from the UK context, but more sort of working more internationally, that the burdens of marine conservation often fall on the shoulders of the small scale fishermen and their families. And I've seen that repeated in many places. So I would really stress that we need to look at who is able to absorb such a ban and who is not able to absorb it, and what are the implications for those people that would be put out of business, and how are those costs of a ban distributed across the society. Are some people going to be bearing more of the costs than others? And I think that's a really important piece of work to do at some point. But there's it's a big unknown, which is exactly the problem. We need to find out before we surely advocate for such a massive change as to the makeup of our fishing fleet.
Does any common ground exist between the fishing industry and NGO campaigns to ban trawling? And if so, how might this be built on to progress a way forward?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important area to establish. I think there is common ground where common ground is sought out, can almost always be found in any context. I think there's a common respect for evidence-based arguments and management. I think there's a lot of common respect for the management that the IFCAs have put in place. I think the frustration from NGOs is where the management continues to lack progress, and I think this is understandable. But how much of this is about actual lack of progress, or is it about lack of awareness of what we have in place here, things that are working? I think there will be common ground around trying to reduce waste, reduce environmental impact, common ground about the importance of working with fishermen in partnership as much as possible. Some of the work I've done in the last few years has been working very closely with the Blue Marine Foundation. There's brilliant colleagues there, and we've been running workshops to hear from the inshore and small scale fishing sector about some of the challenges that they are facing in terms of ensuring that their livelihoods are sustainable and they're able to achieve a good quality of life. So there is common ground there. I think it's often behind the scenes, and it is often not seen in the sort of very polarized debates that get splashed all over the newspapers. But I think many people working from all sides are very committed to improving collaboration, ensuring that the debates are fair and that everyone has a heard voice, and that we're committed to try and progress some kind of joined up thinking as we move forward.
And as we do, who gets to decide? Policy is increasingly shaped by public pressure. How do we ensure that science stays at the heart of its conversation?
Drivers who switch and save with Progressive could save hundreds. With that kind of money, you could go big time on a fancy water bottle with ultra titanium alloy metal. You're not sure why you need all that. I mean, it just holds water. But you're getting it anyway. Because if you're hiking near an active volcano and you accidentally drop the bottle into molten lava, your water will still be icy cold. Switch to Progressive and you could save big time. For water bottles. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states. Potential savings will vary.
Well, I think that's a lot of that is down to scientists. They need to make sure their evidence is heard by the right people, and they need to make sure that they communicate their science clearly, that is understandable by a wide range of different actors involved in this. And they need to work harder to collaborate with people from different disciplines to be able to speak with a single voice. So that is something that I think scientists need to get better at doing generally. But policy is always going to be shaped by public pressure as well. So it's just recognizing that science should stay at the heart, but it probably rarely is at the heart of all of this. The politics is always very strong. So that's a good question. But all we can do is try to speak with a single voice. And I think that, again, is where it's so important for collaboration between environmental NGOs and the fishing industry and scientists, so that they can find out what that single voice might be. Because when everyone comes together and says the same thing, that is when I think the science really starts to be heard, when it's advocated in that way.
And who really drives the narrative? Scientists, NGOs, the media, or public figures like Attenborough?
I think that there's a role for everyone. Communication of science across broad audiences is really important, and people like David Attenborough help to do that. So, we're not all good communicators. I'm a terrible communicator. I'd rather be sitting in the library writing by myself and speaking to no one. But we've all got to, I think, just try and find that common ground again. Yeah, so that the narrative is clear and agreed as much as possible. And you won't always get agreement on every point, but in that case, which are the points that can be agreed, and can those things be communicated better? Because I think that the public must be pretty confused, to be honest. Some research I've done just this summer was and last year as well. We did a public survey on how the public in coastal communities feel about the fishing industry, and it was overwhelmingly positive. And I wonder how that same public will feel going to watch the movie and maybe feeling quite conflicted and confused by some of the messages that come from that movie. So we've got to sort some of this out, I think, and just try and join things up a bit better as scientists working more closely with NGOs and the media.
I agree with that, Sarah. And I would say what I feel is one of the big problems in it all is you get enforcement, you get scientists, and you get fishermen. And neither of them trust each other.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I don't trust is a difficult concept. I mean, I don't trust myself half the time. It's a yeah, are we expecting too much to think that we need to trust one another in that way? I think if we can respect one another, that's the foundation of a good relationship, and the relationship is what matters. I think, and the communication is what matters. And I said earlier, I was at the Whitby Fish and Chips Festival, and it was a brilliant example of the importance of festivals like that. It was 2 days of so many different people coming together. You had the public, you had the local fishermen, you had the local IFCA, you had myself, academics, and environmental NGO staff, all there together for 2 days talking about and celebrating fisheries. And spending that quality time together is just so incredibly important, and we don't do enough of it. So I would say that the most important thing is trying to create more platforms where people can come together, and then they realize quite often that they're on the same page after all.
I did a previous podcast with Paul Gilroy from the Magpie Cafe, and he talks about the festival, Fish and Chips. And what I thought was tremendous, that I felt about it, was how enthusiastic and the importance he put in it to get that message out to the public. So that's what we need, positive drive like that to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, festivals are really important. And there's a particularly good one, I have to say, that, all sorts of inspirational stuff happened over the weekend. It's amazing. Young ladies, 11 years old, doing demonstrations of seafood cookery and all that stuff. And it was a really important platform to just come together and not be at loggerheads around management from our different perspectives, but just be together as human beings, and have a bit of a laugh. It's really, really good. Yeah.
Definitely. Trawling and food security. Can we feed a growing population without bottom trawling? Are we not feeding billions of people worldwide, not just saving seagrass?
I think we can save seagrass and retain food security if we have the right management in place. And I think both are important.
Okay. Yeah, they can coexist. I totally agree with you. I asked AI a question for everybody on this series, and the response is a challenge to Attenborough. If you had 5 minutes with Sir David, what would you say?
Yeah, this is a nice question. I think I would ask him to go and spend a day with his local IFCA and just learn about what they do. And the reason I would ask him to do that is that I think he'd feel inspired and hopeful for our future, because I know that is how I feel whenever I spend time with an IFCA. I work a lot with the Northumberland IFCA, and I always come out of their offices thinking, I'm really glad I just spent that time chatting with them. I learned so much. So I think that's what I would suggest he would do. Yeah.
Good answer. Which book or article do you think everyone in fisheries should read?
Yeah. So I think, one of the frustrations that I've had over the last sort of couple of years is the lack of recognition of MPA management by IFCA. So you may have picked up on some of that frustration in this interview. So I would suggest firstly a book chapter, by Sarah Coulthard and others at the Southern IFCA, where she discusses the management of the Poole Harbour dredge fishery, resolving environmental and socioeconomic objectives. And that was published in a book in 2020, edited by John Humphreys and Rob Clark, called Marine Protected Areas. And there's lots of brilliant examples there of how effective management has been put in place and some of the challenges and successes around doing that, in great detail, with loads of both national and international case studies. So I think that would be a really good place to start. But if I may, there's also a very good paper that was written by Rob Clark, who's the chief officer of the Association of IFCAs, and John Humphreys and others, called The Dialectics of Nature. That was published in 2017 in Marine Policy. And that talks about the emergence of the policy of the management of commercial fisheries in English European marine sites. And it really explains in great detail the history and the context of the revised approach that I've mentioned in this interview, the evolution of IFCAs who were created to deliver it. And I think that's such important context to understand what we have achieved and realise that we're perhaps further forward with MPA management than we might have first anticipated watching the Attenborough movie. And I suppose really with a view to building on that which is working well, rather than just throwing it under a bus, which I sometimes feels is the case. So those two I think would be really good.
Sounds good. So, Sarah, one word to describe the future of British fisheries.
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you for asking it. I think the first word that popped into my head is fragile. However, I then decided to just look that up in the dictionary. Obviously, I know what it means, but I wanted to see precisely how it was defined. And the first words of that description said breaks easily. And I thought, hang on a minute, that's not right, because fishermen don't break easily. They're resilient. They're a resilient bunch, and they demonstrate that resilience every day. So I thought that's not the right word. So I thought, what is a similar word to fragile? So I looked at precious. And the definition of precious, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is of great value, not to be wasted or treated carelessly. And I thought that's about right.
That's absolutely wonderful. What a wonderful answer. And certainly well worth getting it on. No, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. Anything else when we're on?
Well, I just hope that these podcasts can be used to share knowledge, to critically reflect on different views, maybe make people think about points that they haven't thought about from a different perspective, and to try and be a bit sort of open arms really about trying to move forward in a more collaborative way where we can bridge some of these divisions between environmental NGOs and fishing industry, because they are artificial divisions. Ultimately, we all want healthy oceans and sustainable fisheries and flourishing coastal communities. That is our common ground. And I think we need to start making more of an effort to really recognise that and build on it.
Excellent. Where can our listeners follow you online?
I'm rubbish at online stuff. Just the Newcastle website, probably. I don't really do that much stuff on online. So there's the university webpage, University of Newcastle, and we have a coastal fisheries cluster. If you Google that, it's on the NICER website, which is the National Innovation Centre for Rural Enterprise, at Newcastle University.
Wonderful. I think with that, we'll maybe fold up. And I'd just like to thank you very much. I felt it was a very balanced and fair view you had and things. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for inviting me. I've enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.